In the previous example, I had created an image that began with a landscape canvas and ended with an image that is in portrait format. I wanted to show you that the reverse is also possible. So I set myself the task of creating a piece of artwork that begins with a canvas in portrait format and ends in landscape format. Setting yourself a challenge does alter how you approach the work, and I do recommend that you do this in your own practice. It can push your creativity and talents and make you more flexible in your approach to creating artwork. It's easier to experiment with tasks that are set by others. They are often tried and tested methods that have been adopted more generally, or they are the theories and ideas of a single artist. But if you really want to push your work further, learn to set challenges for yourself. I had already planned to begin this piece in portrait format, so I began with the diamond guide. If you're faced with a blank canvas, it's sometimes difficult to know where to start. But I knew that I was creating an abstract, and I literally needed to look at the diamond guide and choose a line to respond to. I decided on that right vertical line, and this was my first step at creating this piece. I wanted you to see these first steps because as the image gets more complex, you can begin to struggle to see the steps that were involved in its creation. Don't get lost in the big picture. Every creation is a collection of small steps that aren't as complicated as they seem. There is a pathway. When it comes to this type of work, the artist doesn't have a picture in their mind of the finished piece. They are focused on the next step, and the artist watches as the painting reveals itself. This kind of process can be full of tiny surprises. That one blue wave became many vertical lines. I also added 2 abstract forms that were placed in the significant areas where all those lines intersect. This seemed like a good time to rotate the canvas. I rotated it 90 degrees to the right, and then I looked at it with the rule of thirds grid. Both of those shapes are too far out to be in line with those vertical lines. It doesn't look as good in landscape position. It's unbalanced, but that is a great opportunity for any artist. I added some purple abstract forms. I placed one in the bottom left corner where the lines intersect, and I placed another in the top right corner. Instead of placing it on the focal point, I placed it around the focal point. It highlights that area. By creating a shape from the colour purple, it also changed the shape of the blue surrounding area. The painting still has a shape on that focal point. It's a blue shape that has been defined by the edges of the purple shape. When you create abstract art using this kind of process, everything that you place on the canvas alters what is already present. This process of layering constantly creates new shapes. I rotated the canvas another 90 degrees. When I did the last piece, I rotated it 90 degrees and then returned it to its original position, and then I repeated the process. I'd learnt from that process and now I wanted to go further. At this point, the canvas was 180 degrees from the original starting point. I took a moment to consider the composition, and then I added the diamond guide. The central line seemed to be lacking any key elements, so that was the first thing that needed to be rectified. I added a green curve on the central line. It curves around the focal point in the top area, creating a small light blue shape. That green curve has broken that light blue shape into pieces. I also added two prominent shapes on the other two vertical lines. The piece is balanced to the diamond guide. I didn't feel ready to rotate the canvas. There was more that I wanted to add. There are no hard rules with this kind of process. There are many forks in the road, and each path will lead to something different. There are no good or bad choices. Each path is a chance to exercise a different set of skills. A lot of times I will achieve balance and then rotate the canvas. Sometimes you've got to push yourself and do something different. This time I decided to stick with this format for a little bit longer. I added a broken line of orange abstract forms. They begin at that central line and travel to the bottom left corner. I then felt there was too much orange on one side of the canvas, and I balanced it out by placing some more orange in the bottom right-hand corner. Still, I didn't feel ready to rotate the canvas. I decided to add another purple shape. It circles the upper focal point on the canvas and travels to the purple shape in the lower part of the canvas. It was beginning to seem balanced and interesting. I could have continued working in portrait format, but my last image ended in portrait format, and I'd already decided this image would be a landscape composition. I rotated the canvas another 90 degrees, and immediately the canvas seemed too heavy on the left side. I placed the rule of thirds grid above the image and thought about my next step. I drew some blue squares on the right vertical line of the grid, a blue circle where the lines intersect in the bottom left corner, and a curved line along the bottom horizontal line. At this point I decided to rotate the canvas again. I could have continued working in this format, but I could see another challenge to set for myself. One more 90-degree turn and my canvas would have gone full circle. I'd be back to my original starting point. I felt it was an interesting challenge and I wanted to have a go. The central line seemed empty and the piece needed more detail in that area. There wasn't anything prominent placed there. I placed some abstract shapes along that central line, and immediately the composition began to improve. It was balanced to the diamond guide. But I decided at the beginning of this piece it would be a landscape composition that adhered to the rule of thirds, and although there was lots of potential in continuing with this format, I decided to rotate the canvas for the last time. This composition seems fairly balanced as a rule of thirds composition. Those blue shapes are placed on those key areas, the place where the lines intersect in the lower left and upper right. I think that's one of the interesting things about working in this way. When you return to the previous format, you can see echoes of when you last worked in this format. It seems new yet familiar. There were parts that responded to the rule of thirds, but I wanted to make it clearer and more dominant. I placed another green shape on the upper end of the right vertical. I then began to work in red. I drew shapes along the left vertical and lower horizontal. At this point, I wanted to add some more light and shade. You might be wondering why I keep leaving this to the very end of my process. It is something I could choose to do earlier, and I've used some shading within these abstract forms, although it's more a question of when to add detail. I don't want to add detail all the way through my process because it will be time consuming and a lot of the detail will be covered up by another shape. If I leave it till later on in the process, I know that I'm not going to cover up my hard work. It's a practical decision. Here is the finished piece, a vibrant, interesting composition that began in portrait format and ended in landscape format. I hope this opens your mind to the possibilities that are created when you work in this way. These pieces prove that you can create artwork using both the diamond guide and the rule of thirds.